Before we start tonight, we'd like to just have a moment of respectful silence as we think of those whose lives were lost in the terrible act of violence at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida on February 14th. So on behalf of our community and the nation, we will continue to hold their families, their classmates, and their community in our thoughts. So moving on, if there are any comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda, seeing none, we will move on to any amendments to the agenda.
We have one amendment, and that's item 11. We're going to remove item 11, and we'll put it on, I think, to a future agenda.
All right. So number 5, public hearing on proposed capital improvement bond issue.
Yeah. So John Aubin and I want to walk you through some of the specifics of the bond and be able to answer questions from the board, obviously, or the community. This is mostly a community event. As you know, the city they have a couple bond issues, and they've had some hearings, and we wanted to make sure people were informed here at the meeting, as well as those that are watching on Channel 16. So we'll walk you through this.
We'll get out of the way. Yeah. I'll go be Arnell.
So, as you all know, in this particular town meeting day, people will vote on 3 articles. One is for school board positions. Article 1, Article 2 is for the budget, and Article 3 is for the actual bond. And so, important for people to be educated on what's in the bond and the rationale for the bond, and we hope to explain a little bit of that in further detail, although we've talked about this at all of our previous board meetings specific to the budget. So why issue a long-term bond? Again, entities issue long-term bonds to finance over an extended period improvements with extended lives, where benefits from the improvements will accrue to residents beyond those that are currently here paying. So let me just pause for a second. When we want to make upgrades to our schools, if being more mindful about those items that last 20 years or more, we think it's important that it transcends over the taxpayers into the future years as well. So, for instance, if there's a $100,000 need that's for some sort of an upgrade, and we'll talk about those briefly in a second, we think spreading those out over a 20-year period, so those whom will move here next year or the following year will pay on that specific entity or whatever that is. Again, that goes into further explanation. Again, those items that might be 20, 30, or 40 years of useful life should be spread out over the term of the 20 years, not just on the burdens of next year. Why issue the long-term bond? Again, this word we've used quite regularly about this intergenerational equity. And again, I've already just talked about that. For a long period of time, we've had, on average, about $525,000 of annual average run rate in our budget to maintain our facilities. All 5. That's not actually what the stewardship plan called for in any one of those years. It was regularly always higher. But given some of the budgetary constraints, we had to pare that down, but on average, over a 5-year period, we've been around $525,000. So the $950,000, 500, is really going to look at some specific things. There's nothing in here that I would say to our school facilities is changing. It's really specific to the upgrade. So this bond is $950,000 and 500. So why issue the long-term bond? Again, I'm being overly redundant, but it does, obviously, we're going to pay on the interest and the principal payments. So over the course of a 20-year period, it's about $380,000 of interest payments over that period of time that gets embedded in the principal payment. The first year is just 1/2 of the interest, so it starts out low and then it begins to ramp up. But it's a leveraging system that allows us to do this over that period of time. Not long ago, well, for me it seems like long ago, the state of Vermont used to have a 30% new construction funding mechanism. So anything that qualified based on your enrollment and your specific need, you could receive 30% construction aid to make those upgrades. That was, again, I'm going to say about 10 years ago, that was first put on a moratorium and then removed. It's currently not an option. So anyone who wants to build anything new, that doesn't exist. In addition, for a long period of time, at least, we felt that it should not just be new construction, it should have been also for maintaining your facilities. So if we have a stewardship plan is a very sequential plan with identified things that we need to be doing to our facilities. If we're compliant with that, then we've always felt like there should be some sort of a mechanism to support from the state. That's currently, there's some conversations in the legislature now, whether that will come to fruition, we're not really sure.
So the next question, of course, is how does the bond get repaid, over what kind of period of time? And what we see here is an estimated, a projected debt repayment schedule, and it starts in 2019 or thereabouts, and it extends through to 2039, and in 2040 it's all paid off. The first year of a bond is always a kind of a light year for payments, because you haven't even really got the principal yet in the 2019 year. In 2000, you won't have had it for a year. The second year of the bond is really the first full payment of the bond issue, and in this estimation, we're looking at $83,644 for the first year's payment, both principal of $47,525 and interest of $36,119. The typical way that municipal borrowing is done is with constant principal payments. So you take in this case, $950,500, and you divide it by 20, and that results in $47,525 for the next 20 years. And as the principal is paid down, the interest payments decline. So the second year is the most expensive year at this $83,644, but beyond that it drops, and this looks like about $5,000 each year. The total payments decline until there's no principal, there's no interest left, and the total payment is to $47,525.
So John, quick question that we've heard is that the interest rate, we don't exactly know. What we've estimated is at about 4% interest. And oftentimes it comes in lower than that.
Oh, I really think this will come in at like 3.5, maybe 3.25. This is a propitious time to be doing a borrowing. For the last several years, rates have been low. They do show signs of going up, so it may be a good time to do this now rather than try to do it 5 years from now. But this is based on a rate that I'm sure will.
So if it's 3.5, then the interest, then that interest calculation would be less than what's being shown. Mm-hmm.
This just shows that schedule graphically to see the first year, the small payment, and then every year it declines after that, and in 2024 it's completely gone.
39.
So what improvements are proposed, and this again has been shared also in our budget communications. Again, hard for people to see. We've kind of broken it down by schools, high school, middle school, and the 3 elementaries. As I said before, there's no configuration being proposed and changed, no new wings being added to the elementaries. It's really pretty significant to upkeep. One area that is a new facility would be at the Munson Field in the Iverson track, where the turf field is. There is currently not a facility for restrooms or any sort of opportunity for people to change or to have any training facility there on that site. So this bond has $325,000 of that would go towards the restrooms and a training room facility for that particular location. In addition, a storage facility, and as I was telling the folks over at the senior lunch today, and we got into some conversation about appropriately taking care, we have, again, a fair amount of equipment, because we take care of, you know, our plowing, we take care of lawn mowing and things of that nature, but we're strapped for storage space. We do have some things that are stored under the carports over at the bus garage, but we need the bus garage too, so we're in need of a storage facility. So this has the $50,000 for a storage facility. At the high school, library reconfiguration, we took the, this past year, in November, December, the community library, I was over there talking with those folks today too on the budget, but they moved out of our high school and are now located at the mall. And so this has some money to repurpose the furniture, some of the circulation, and some of those things in there. So there's $150,000 in there. Beyond that, and again, I'm gonna be pretty redundant here at the other schools, there's fire panel upgrades, key and door hardware, security measures that are needed. Pretty much across the board. There are some things here at Tuttle, a burner replacement. Remember, it's not a boiler, it's a burner. And then we have associated throughout all of these carpet and some asbestos floor tile that's replaced. Again, floor tile, we've been on this pretty regularly every year, but a lot of this is original tile. It's not in jeopardy. It's not a harmful situation. We have it appropriately covered, but this is, again, mitigating and getting rid of and putting new in. And that pretty much goes throughout all of these. There's some lighting fixture replacements where we have older ballast and higher wattage. They're now turned to LED, and so we're making some of those upgrades as well at these locations. Again, most of this is kind of just essential work, but we, as I said earlier, have been unable to really keep up with that.
David, can I ask a quick
Yes.
question? It looks like on here, the range of dollar values on these is $3,000 to $325,000. So, in terms of projects, so clearly there's an argument around sort of material impact on the cost of some of these projects. It doesn't look like the dollar amount of the project was a screening criteria. Is the screening criteria here the useful life of the asset?
Correct. And as long as it's 20 years or more. So a lot of these are, you know.
So they were just aggregated to
That's correct.
go into
Yeah.
the bond, gotcha.
And the idea is those that look of the same type, flooring projects, would be bundled together into one contract and bid out. It would be a much bigger project than just that amount of money. So this would commit the district to about $75,000, $80,000 a year in bond cost per year. So how does that compare with the debt service the district has paid in prior years? So this is a chart that shows the debt service payments in the past. This is 2005 here and 2018 here. We're coming off a pretty sizable debt service here. We paid off a bond issue in 2015 and took on another one in 2016 that will go out this way. But this issue is this the blue bars down here, about $75,000 or $80,000 a year, as I said. But in terms of the, say, historical scale of this borrowing versus others the district has borrowed, it's fairly small. We think it's affordable, but it gets at some nagging issues we've had the last few years. So the tax impact on this bond, do we have any estimate for that? We have attempted, as we do with most all these things, to show a tax estimate for this bond. This would add, in the first year, 0.09 cents, that's 9/100ths of a cent, to the tax rate. 86 cents on an additional tax on a $100,000 property. That's deceiving, as I said, because the first year is quite a bit smaller than the subsequent years. In the second year, it would go up, the tax rate impact $1.64 on the tax rate, and for a $100,000 property, it would add $3.58. total dollars for the property value.
Can you, it's not $1.64, it's 1.64 cents, right?
1.64 cents, yes.
Thanks.
No, not $1.64.
That's what I thought you'd said.
And again, what I've done here is computed a debt tax rate, meaning how much tax rate is required, and both going forward in this bond issue and in prior years, to put it into context. So that, say, in 2011, we had a debt tax rate of $4.50.
No,
And-
4.5 cents, right?
And I think it's $4.50.
4.5 cents, not $4.50, right?
Oh,
Cents on the
excuse me,
tax
excuse
rate,
me,
right?
that's cents, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
$4.50,
4.5 cents.
4.5
4.5
cents.
cents
Yes.
sounds too
There-
small, so my
there you go.
mind is going somewhere else. So that's what the so-called debt tax rate has been and will be in coming years. Now, I didn't try to go the full length of this particular bond issue. It would be out here somewhere, because you never know what the state's tax rate for schools are gonna be in the long term, but I figured this time horizon was fair to try to estimate. So is there an appropriate level of debt for a school district in Vermont? It's really all over the lot. What we tried to look at was some surrounding school districts to see what their outstanding debt was. And I got this information from the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank. And if a district borrowed from another source, it wouldn't show on here, but at least we've got some data points that show surrounding districts and what they feel comfortable with in terms of debt. So this one over here is Burlington. Burlington is a big place. They've got about $28,000 in outstanding debt. Another one over here is Williston Town School District. They're currently carrying about $20,000 in school district debt.
Making me millions.
20 million, yeah.
Actually, 20 million. The
You're
South
gonna
Burlington-
give me crap about zero.
Yeah. Sorry. We didn't practice this one enough. South Burlington is here with about $4 million worth of outstanding debt. So we can, I think, the district can absorb this level of debt without too much difficulty, I think, financially. The second answer to this question is, is there a limit? And there is a limit. In Title 24, Chapter 53 of the Vermont statutes annotated, that says a municipal corporation, which a school district is, shall in the aggregate not exceed 10 times the amount of the last grand list of the municipal corporation. So in our case, we would have $30 million worth of,
Billion.
Billion.
I did it wrong again, I did say 30 million here. $30 billion worth of debt, and we're down here hardly even visible, so we're pretty safe in that regard.
That debt limit doesn't seem very safe.
No.
It's just, that's
No, I
preposterous.
don't think anybody should ever
A
get.
tenth of grand list would be,
I think that one's yours, David.
they must have gotten something wrong.
So, again, I wanna pause just for a quick second before we go on to this next slide. And, for a long, and I'm being a little bit repetitive, but for a long, long time, at least as long as I've been here, we've typically carried our facility needs within our expenditure budget. And as I said earlier, average in the last 5 years, about $525,000. It's had some variation, and we've had a couple bonds in that, but we've typically carried those things within our expenditure budget. Those of you who are aware about some of the ratios and equalized, spending per equalized pupil, when you continue to carry that in your operating budget, that's part of the divisor, which is being determined on the cost per pupil across the state. So it's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison. I'd like to say on behalf of the school board and the administration, we've been working hard to try to do due diligence to maintain our facilities. They're not brand new, but we've been doing it, and we've been carrying that in our operating budget. many of my colleagues across other districts don't do it that way. In some ways, they don't necessarily have a stewardship plan, and therefore, there's the surprises that often come along, which are generally, those surprises are more expensive than in proactive measures of maintenance. So we think that this is an important concept that should be thought about more thoroughly into the future. And again, I want to reemphasize that if I'm going to buy, if we're going to put that $64,000 burner on here at the middle school, should the taxpayers of tomorrow be the only ones that are going to pay for it? Or should it be the people that are going to come 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, because it's a useful life? It's an important mechanism that I think really, really needs to be understood from that perspective. So anytime we go out with specific work or needed work, we always are required to bid out that work. And so we have a very deliberate process by which we put out what the work is, and we receive bids back that are sealed bids. We open those up and we determine, based on the criteria, who most appropriately meets it, and then what is the cost. And we will make then that decision based on that. We cannot go out and just pick anybody whom we want. There's a very, very specific required bid process. So, Martin, that's where we are. I don't know if there's folks that have questions for John or I. We'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions? No.
One quick
Over here.
question or comment, I guess, is because we have put capital projects with lifetimes that range all over the map, but including up to 20 and 30 years into the operating budget in the past. I mean, I know you talked about this strategy of intergenerational equity. That is a newer concept. Is that accurate?
It is a newer concept. I'm not aware that other school districts are doing it
Well,
this
I mean,
way or
I guess my
communicating
point
it
is,
that way.
it's not so much the language of it or the notion of it, but in some ways, I feel like, in hindsight, had we been able to sort of keep on top of the stewardship plan in an operating budget, we might not have never had this conversation. And if I look at it, in some ways, we were burdening the annual operating budget with some of these projects that future generations would enjoy, for instance. So, and given that it is calculated into the equalized pupil formula, probably slightly overstating. Again, materially, you said on annual, I think we talked about 500 to 525,000. That's about 1% of the operating budget. So it's materially, it's not a really big amount, but had all of those projects been at least 20 years, that would have been a slight overstatement on equalized pupils. Is that correct?
Correct. Remember that the 525 was not fully integrated the work that we needed. We made reductions to get it to the 525 average because of some of the financial, some of our past budget situation, and we needed to make some reductions. So that's the average. It wasn't actually what was called for in the identified stewardship plan. And there's many people in the room here that have had connections or contact with our stewardship plan that I think is about 14 or some odd years old now that we did. The other part, again, I think is important to note is that the community, the board, put forward a recommendation, and the community passed it, was a capital reserve fund. The capital reserve fund was expected to be established that would allow us to build that fund up so that it would be specific to the capital needs. Currently, there's $300,000 in it. We have made a decision not to put anything more in it because we're going to a bond. In the future, that could be an instrument and an arm to put some additional money into it to get it to an amount slightly above, or I would say above the amount that's needed in any one year. So for instance, if there's $500,000 in the year and there's, let's say $800,000 in there, and the next year amount calls for this, we would reappropriate it with that balance so that we can help that fund stay where it needs to be. again, I think this is an important concept. This is one that certainly, I've been, in the position and in this district, and I think it's an important one that all Vermont schools really need to be paying attention to, because most of our schools are somewhere between 50 and 80 years old in Vermont. And many of them were built with the 30% state construction aid, but I don't think any of them have any sort of a reserve fund or a capital reserve fund, or even, in many cases, a stewardship plan that identifies those key issues. So.
Any other questions from the board? From the audience? No? All right. We'll move on to announcements and student representative report, but first of all, real quick, the reason I'm sitting here as the chair, even though Elizabeth is the chair, is Elizabeth didn't know that she was gonna get back from out of town today, so it was planned that I would chair this meeting, and instead of throwing my world into a tizzy after all the preparation I did, she's letting me chair. So anyway, moving on. Alex?
All right. So TIE students, I have here that TIE students left for France today, but I believe there was some kind of issue in that regard. I think Air France is on strike, something along those lines. I heard this from a peer of mine, so again, don't quote me on that.
They're getting out tonight. They had a delay, so they
Yeah?
could all
Okay.
stay in school today and then leave later on, and they're departing later on tonight.
Perfect. Thank you for the update. Yeah, I wasn't completely sure about that. But Tim Weil received the Lifetime Achievement Award from VT Schools Counseling Association. Diane Gregoire won the Vermont 2018 Gymnastics State Champion on Sunday. And the SBHS dance team won Jazz State Championships and Palm State Championships on Saturday. Congratulations to the FHTMS Math Counts team for winning the Northwest Championship on Saturday, February 17th. Next week is vacation week. Please remember to vote on Tuesday, March 6th at the designated polling locations based on your address. Congratulations to Hiba Ali, FHT middle school student, who will represent the district at the Vermont State Spelling Bee competition on March 14th at St. Michael's College. And lastly, you are invited to a student panel and free dinner Thursday night, February 22nd, from 6:30 to 8 p.m. in the FHTMS cafeteria, as a part of the Healthy School series on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Come hear students reflect on current topics and then take part in small group dialogues while having a delicious dinner. The event is free and open to the public. All are welcome.
Thank you. Any other announcements from the board?
Just one additional to Alex's comments. I had the opportunity to go to the UVM Math Counts, the Math Counts events that was at UVM, the Rowell Building, and there for a fair portion of the competition, and we had 9 of the 12 were in the finals, and I had my wife with me, who's also a very much math-oriented person and graduated from UVM, and we sat there in amazement while the problems came up, and they had 45 seconds to solve them, and I think within generally about 10 to 11 seconds, the answers were popping out, and these were questions they did not have any knowledge of. So quite impressive, and obviously FHTMS and John Radimer, the coach, who is a retired teacher, is really doing a great job with the kids. So congratulations to them. That was fun. Also, Orchard had a all-day kind of a reading activity today, so people were invited in to read, and that went on a good chunk of the day. I unfortunately wasn't able to get over there, but I know that was also a pretty celebrated event today.
Great, excellent. So I'll move on to city and school collaboration.
So we don't have a lot here. Elizabeth and I are scheduled for Friday morning. So this will be a first. We have a pretty sizable agenda of topics to cover. So we'll be able to report back a little bit more as we go forward. I did attend on the city side. The city held a meeting with the South Burlington Business Association earlier in the week. I forget, it has to be yesterday, the day before, yeah. And did talk about and highlight some of the things that are happening in the city and some of the things that are expected to happen. And that will also add into our work with the city council, folks tomorrow, or Friday.
Excellent. And the superintendent's report.
So I am happy to say that we have a nice presentation this evening, and I'd love to just have Stuart Weiss, our Director of Learning, just share with you a little bit and do an introduction, and we have some distinguished guests here tonight to present to us, so thanks.
I think I was chosen to do this presentation because I actually saw the live
Yes,
presentation
you did.
on Saturday, January 27th at the Vermont Middle Grades Collaborative, where the sixth graders who I'm about to introduce you to presented. They're all members of the Verve team, and they were at the Davis Center where they presented their original workshop. So Leo Rosowski, Sabrina Burnett, and Julia Gennari led a workshop, and they really did lead it with the support of their teacher, Christy Nold. Additionally, two other of our sixth grade teachers, Caitlin Floyd and Laura Wittes, were there, and they did presentations as well that day. So tonight we're going to hear from Julia, Sabrina, and Leo about their experience in the presentation, and I can just say, because I was there firsthand, it was very impressive. So I'll leave it there.
Trying to keep you out of that chair.
Hi, I'm Julia.
I'm Sabrina.
And I'm Leo. Thank you for having us tonight. And today we're going to be talking about what we did during our presentation and how we got ready, and I'm speaking about how we got ready. So what we chose to do during our presentation was social identity, because that was something we all found interesting during class, and that was something that got us to think. So during the first week of preparing, around like the last 30 to 25 minutes of school, we just play around with the slides and the font, and we were just having fun and laughing about it. And then the second and third week, we really just dove into it because we all found an activity we wanted to do, and we took some time out of our third period and our lunchtime to get ready. And then we have a video we were hoping to share with you.
It's a topic that doesn't get talked a lot about, and it's a topic you just can't ignore.
At my station, we were doing iceberg models, so I was explaining the iceberg model, which is a representation of what you can see and can't see about a person. And I had people fill out their own iceberg model, and then afterwards we shared about what we wrote. Like, I was really being listened to, and no one was interrupting me, and they're actually hearing what I was saying and reflecting off of that.
When I was showing them those advertisements from 2018 and 2017, they looked shocked that this kind of thing is still happening, that racism and sexism is still happening today, even just like the advertisements.
Right now, it isn't talked about very much with the generation that we were talking to, those teachers. But if we have the kids in school teach most of them that, or as many as we can, then that generation could be different.
How would you apply what you learned in here inside your classrooms?
So I'm going to be talking about what happened in the workshop. So in our workshop about social identity, we just started like who we are and what we were doing and just why. And then, but like the main part of it was stations. We split up into 3 stations. Leo's station was iceberg models, like it explained in the video. My station was all about bias and how biases form and why, and how our society is very biased and racist and like sexist and just our everyday things and we don't notice. And Julia's station was identity wheels, and those were how, or like, they really got you to think deeply about who you identify as and who you are. And yeah, that's what we did.
So so after our lesson at UVM, we handed out a feedback form to everyone that attended the lesson. The questions on the form were, what information are you taking home with you after that day? Advice for future presentations, like the one we have coming up in March, also at UVM, on March 3rd, and then anything else they wanted us to know. So, of course, we got a lot of positive feedback after that. We looked at all the feedback we got the day after the presentation, and I think, speaking on behalf of all of us, I think we all had a pretty good time and thought it was like a good experience for all of us. So after doing this, we'd like to thank Life Lagueros for filming us, both at the mini lesson in UVM and in this library for the interview. Audrey Holman for editing the video. Middle Grades Collaborative for hosting us at UVM back in January. Everyone that attended the lesson. Of course, we couldn't do it without our teacher, Miss Nold, and then everyone else involved with that. Yeah, I think that's about it. So does anyone have any questions about that? About anything we did?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you mind telling us what's happening on March 3rd? I'm sorry, I wasn't a good listener to that.
So yeah, we actually have another presentation we're doing at UVM. We don't have a lot of details.
Oh, wait,
I
Miss-
do.
Well,
I don't know what time, but a lot of my family members and close friends work at UVM, and my aunt brought up this thing. It's an activist thing, and they're going to be talking about what they can change and what they can do, and she said that we might have a chance to present there, and we got selected, which is really, really exciting. Yeah, we're basically doing the same presentation, but maybe with a few changes.
Miss Knoll, do you know the time for?
Not yet. We will
Okay.
find out this week what time you're on.
It's awesome, you guys, it was great. I think this is wonderful. Thanks for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Well done.
Excellent. It'll be hard to follow that. But we're going to talk about adverse childhood experiences and trauma-informed education. It's our next topic.
So, Martin, you know what's going on
All
here?
right. I'm going to get up again.
This isn't good. I don't do this to Elizabeth.
This is why you want
So, those of you who don't know, Joanne Godak, our Director of Support Services, is here. This is, again, I think will be a little, just an update, an introduction of ACEs. I think it's appropriate that, this is a conversation currently that's pretty active currently in Vermont, probably not just Vermont, but all over the country. As, we talk about how best to accommodate students in our programs. Also, I think it's important in the direct linkage to some of the concerns around mental health and how we as a community respond to that. So without further ado, let Joanne walk you through a little bit on talking about ACEs. So Joanne, welcome.
Thank you. So David asked me to just share with you a little bit about the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences, what that stands for. Can you go to the next? Susie's here to help me. So ACEs was a study that actually was done in the late 1990s, and they're doing some more work now across the nation around this, but the original study came out then, and they really show that these adverse childhood experiences can have lasting effects, like on your health and behaviors and your life potentials. That's why we're really worried about this with our kids that are coming to us with these adverse childhood experiences. And you can see the number of ACEs that you have really increases the number of these negative health and well-being outcomes that happen. Okay, the next slide. And you see from conception to death, really what happens is if you have adverse childhood experiences, you get this disrupted neurodevelopment. I think I talked about that the last time I spoke with the school board in terms of how children are coming to us with brains that are not functioning well. They're actually spending a lot of time in their brainstem because they're in this flight or fight mode all the time. They're not able to access their cognitive abilities, so it becomes really challenging. And then that leads to social, emotional, and cognitive impairments, and then some health risk behaviors, and then disease, and then early death. So that's the sort of the trajectory. So we want to kind of try and stop this if we can. Next slide, Susie. So this one slide was helpful for me. This was the original study, and some of these things have changed. They show like what the percentages of the ACEs that came out in the first study. So they're looking at, was it emotional abuse, physical, sex? These are the kind of questions that they ask. It's in the terms of abuse, household challenges, and neglect. So these are all the adverse childhood experiences that could happen to any one of us, and probably have happened. There's not that many people who haven't had at least one adverse childhood challenge or experience.
Sorry, can you just tell me what age we're talking about, your range for the children?
Age of the children?
Well, you're saying adverse childhood experiences, so
Yep.
what age ranges are in these studies?
I don't know the age ranges that are in the studies, but this is done by the CDC, so it's something that you could actually, I got most of these slides right off the web, so there's a lot of information on that, so I'm not sure exactly the age ranges that they did the study with.
Okay.
Okay? They actually went back and looked at they're looking at the trajectory now of people over time, so they're looking at the connection with health-related issues, so so I don't have the answer for you on that one.
Okay.
So these are the areas that they looked at and the percentages of challenges that kids had. Next slide, Susie. So actually what we need to do is what can we do about the ACEs? So basically what's recommended is that there's more home visiting, parenting training, prevention, social work, a lot of social services, but they talk about childcare here, but we're really looking at the kids who come to school. So what can we change when kids are here and within our care at school? Next slide. So what we're doing kind of is reacting now to this, and you've heard this when we talk about the budget and the number of FTEs and the people that we have working in the district, is we have students who have these trauma-related behaviors. We have them with adults providing support for them all day long so that they can be active participants and can be safe in our schools and other people can be safe. We also have kids who are getting disciplined and they get removed from school. We have many kids who are placed in therapeutic classrooms, in schools and residential programs. These are things that we're reacting to because they're coming to us with these challenges. Basically, with ACEs, they know that you have to build resilience to face this. So it's not like a death sentence for all of us. When you have adverse childhood experiences, the more resilient skills that you build, the better you're able to overcome the adverse effects that are going to happen. And what they're saying is basically close relationships, safety, and more of those kind of relationships for students are going to allow them to build a resilience. And what we're doing now is basically, in the therapeutic programs, we're trying to work on the mental health issues, but what we want to do is build that resilience in our schools so that we can build those close relationships. So the next slide is our proactive measures. So you've heard about some of the things that we're building in our district. Positive behavior interventions and supports is a model that we have in 3 of our elementary schools, where all the teachers are trained in how to attend to the positive things that are going on in the school, creating a climate that's supportive and rules to follow and ways to reinforce the good things that are happening, and they have school-wide celebrations, class-wide celebrations. It's an evidence-based strategy that really helps to provide a good climate and good atmosphere for all kids to build resilience. We have we're doing a lot of trauma-informed practice training right now. Joelle Van Lent, we had hoped she could be here tonight to talk to you, but she's not available, is working with the district. She's done training with all of our elementary teachers, and she's also starting to do some work with the middle and high school. Part of the work that she's been doing has actually been, the best place to start has actually been with compassion fatigue. So many of our teachers are overwhelmed with the types of behaviors and students that are entering their classrooms. They want to be able to teach, but it's hard to teach when kids aren't able to use their brains. So she's working with teachers on how they can take care of themselves and understand what's going on in kids' brains so that they're not packing all this in and going home and just getting completely overwhelmed. and exhausted from the work that they're doing. It's been a really good place to start, and then they're really ready to listen to some strategies. We now have a whole district team, a trauma-informed practices or resilient schools team, where we're planning an entire action plan about how we're going to train and move the whole district forward in trying to change our practices around how we deal with kids who have these types of behaviors, bringing them in close and co-regulating, building relationships rather than the old model of punishment and consequences for misbehaviors. That doesn't really work with kids who have trauma. We're also building a universal design for learning, which is redesigning how our classrooms work. There's more active participation, more engagement, thinking about where kids can actually be actively engaged in the learning, and that works for kids who have differences, who have different, their brains work different. They have to be able to move, they have to be able to have other options for learning. All of our teachers are participating in that training. You know that we've talked about adding behavior coaches or behavior analysts to our staff, and the behavior coaches are really to help work, not only to help teachers to deal with kids whose behaviors are challenging and help to regulate and teach those kids skills, but to work with classroom teachers on how they might reorganize the environment so it might be safer or less stimulating, to change their practices and make sure that they're giving more positive statements than negative statements in their class, instead of corrections in their classroom. And we don't have enough information to know how that's working yet, but these are things that we're hoping is going to change the way we interact with all kids. And then our multi-tiered systems of support, which you've heard us talk about a lot too, is our pyramid of support. So what are we doing for every kid? So that's the trauma-based, the resilient schools, the PBIS, and then what do we need to do for kids who still need a little extra? What does that look like? We have check-in and check-out for kids. They might have to check in with the teachers in the morning when they come in. Then we have small group counseling sessions for students, and then we have kids who have major needs who might need more support than that. Well, that should be a few kids. It shouldn't be as many kids as we're supporting now. And also we have interagency teams. The Act 264, which is a law that's been around for a while. I just was at Howard today talking about revamping and thinking, what was the intent of that law anyways, way back when? We work with mental health, developmental services, the Child and Development Clinic, and social services to create teams to really wrap kids with services, because we provide the FAPE. We provide the free and appropriate public education, but many kids who experience trauma need a wrap. They need more than what we're just doing in school. They need maybe some mental health services in the community. They might need counseling. They might need medication. They might need developmental services. So working with these interagency teams, we can really not only provide a clear behavioral path, but also wrap them and their families with other supports that's going to help them to be more successful. This is kind of a start to the conversation. I wasn't sure exactly what you needed to know. I wanted you to know what we were doing in the school and have an idea of what the ACEs study was about. And I'm hoping that Joelle can come back and talk to you a little bit more. She's an expert in trauma, as well as students with autism. She's working in a lot of school districts in Vermont right now and helping all of us to build the resilience ability of our teachers and the resilience of our students through these practices that are evidence-based. So that's a quick presentation, and questions for me or comments? Yeah.
Thank you, Joanne.
So I just wanted to mention that the film Resilience, I think many people have seen that film. But a number of communities throughout Vermont are hosting showings of that film, and I think you can also access panelists to be part of that, so that following the film, it's a way to introduce the concept of ACEs to a larger community and the impact that has on students and people and adults and their own adverse childhood experiences. And I'm not aware of South Burlington having hosted that film, but it's just out there, it's a resource, and just wanted to bring that up.
So it's interesting you raised that, because I was about to talk about that very thing. I've talked to David, I don't know when it was, in January, and then things got a little bit busy. We were hoping to put something together based on the resilience film and a panel before March, the town meeting day, but that's just wasn't able to happen. So that is on our radar. That I'm hoping to put something together. We can,
That'd be great.
is it Janelle?
Joelle.
Joelle.
Yeah.
I always
Yes,
don't know why I want to say
Joelle
Joelle.
Van Lent.
Yeah, we plan on having Joelle there and perhaps some legislators who are working closely on some issues at the
Right.
State House, George Till, for instance. So that has still been on my radar, it's just that we haven't been able to circle around back to it, but
And
thanks
Martin,
for-
are there at least 3 trauma-related bills in the legislature right now?
At least, I mean, in judiciary, for instance, we don't have a specific trauma-related bill, but it informs some of the things that we're doing with respect to, well, there is one very, very, very specific as far as, I won't get into it, but we have some that we are actually addressing or trying to reduce trauma in our justice system, including with the Human Service Board. So, and that's one you wouldn't have heard of, but there are also several initiatives with respect to ACEs.
I had two, well, actually, one of my questions was on legislation, but 2 others that, Joanne, you may or may not be able to answer. Are there any ACEs data specific to South Burlington?
Not that I'm aware of.
So
I
the
know Vermont,
characterization
when I-
of.
Yeah, when I was looking at the website to prepare for tonight, I know Vermont in 2011 had collected some data, but I couldn't actually find the data, so I don't know, maybe you know more about that, whether they have it in the legislature. I haven't been able to put my hands on it.
So we couldn't characterize our demographic of students for the types of trauma they're
No.
coming into
Not
the
right
school
now.
system with?
No.
And then the other question I have is on, I don't know the right word in the educational world, but sort of the comorbidity, like if you have students, presenting with some form of trauma, is there often another diagnosis or something that pairs with that results in the need for like an IEP, for instance?
Well, post-traumatic stress can be a diagnosis that can qualify for an emotional disturbance, and I think, when I was showing the trajectory with
Yeah,
with the ACEs, other mental health issues can come with that as well. So yes, there is that can result in that. Some of the students that we identify now, we have about 10 kids in our elementary schools that have one-on-ones, and most of them have the post-traumatic stress or other mental health illnesses that have been diagnosed, so.
And this may be a little bit premature, but do we have any early feedback on the pilot work?
No, we don't have anything at this point. It's a little too early yet.
Yeah.
These are long gamers here on the proactive measures. They're not gonna, we're still gonna have to have, and we talk about that a lot with the special education funding, where we still have to have these reactive measures in place as we build the system. It's gonna take time for that to get built.
Thanks.
You may have mentioned, but
Question before we go.
either through the data or by your observation, are the incidences of ACEs increasing over time? All right, and is that,
We have more kids that are coming to us with extremely challenging behaviors. We don't always know about the trauma or the ACEs because we haven't questionnaired them, we don't always have all that information. But it's an assumption that we're making that these kids are coming with some challenges.
so then the follow-on question is that because of better diagnosis and ability to identify the problem? Is it because, well, I'd say comorbidity, or is there some driving element in society, for example, opioid addiction, or something that's driving that greater incidence?
I believe there's something driving the incidence, because it's really changed significantly, not just in our community, but across the whole nation. Is it just opioids? I don't know. I don't think anyone's been able to put their finger on what it is. But I think drug abuse, the homelessness, poverty, all of those things are contributing to it.
Joanne, I understand we don't have sort of outcomes yet on the pilot. How are we tracking? How will we know if it's working or something that we should expand throughout the district? What are the metrics that you're looking at?
We're looking at the Swiss data that we have through our PBIS, so actually just got a bunch of Swiss data for Stuart for his continuous improvement plan. And we also have done a survey of all of our educators around resilient practices, so we're gonna track what they know and understand about resilient practices. Our team did a baseline survey this year, and we're gonna do that annually to see how that works. So those are the data points that we're looking at right now.
Jerry?
So for Elizabeth, David, and John, if I could get some idea of how much money of the school budget goes to how many students who are being monitored or participating in these trauma-related programs to get an idea of how expansive it is and what the cost is, and also how much of federal dollars are driving this program or not driving the program. My interest in the federal dollars is, I believe within the next 10 years, you're going to see lots of changes with regard to how much money the federal government sends to states, because there are a lot of troubles with federal deficits and debt. And so the more you depend upon federal dollars, the more challenging it's going to be if you structurally build programs which depend upon federal dollars, and then all of a sudden somebody shuts off the spigot for that amount of money coming to the state. So I would like to know how much money is being spent on these programs, how many students are enrolled, and how much of your program is dependent upon federal dollars for funding. Is that clear in my request? And I would make one last request to the speaker. If you could get some URL links to David, and then I could communicate with David to learn more about this program
Sure.
on CEC's website, that would be helpful.
Sure. And I just want to respond just to your question about the funding, is that that's really the reason why we're building the system, is to be responsive rather than to be dependent on the higher cost, higher level responses that we have to have now for these students, so. Yes?
I guess I'm not too clear of how much is that, are you in like the kind of researching and observing kind of stage, and then of course dealing with the particular students that have trauma that has to be attended to on a day-to-day basis?
Yep.
You know, I'm seeing kind of, I mean, observing a little bit from the outside, being my daughter's here at the school's part-time. And I kind of have a kind of outside view, a different perspective of like how the culture is and positives and negatives and health and all that kind of thing.
So implementation.
My question clear, like where are you at the process of
Yes.
implementing some of these more positive
Yes.
cultural changes?
Yes, we are. The
Okay.
PBIS is what if you're referring to that, that's a straight model of positive behaviors, attending to positive and changing the culture. And our 3 elementary schools have been, one of them has been implementing it for 5 or 6 years. The other one 3 or 4 years, and one's in its 2nd year.
What about high school level?
The high school level is not using PBIS. They have their social and civic responsibilities that they use, and a method of kids participating, and you might be able to help me out more with this, Alex, but they don't use a positive behavior. They have more of a cultural discussion, and kids participate in it. At the middle school, they're working on restorative justice and some of those pieces. So it's a little bit different as kids reach adolescence and young adulthood, and how you approach the process. You're not going to be giving B-bucks like they do in one school, or apples like they do in the elementary school. It becomes a little bit different. They are less involved in the actual implementation of PBIS, but have their ways of changing the culture and improving those positive pieces. The work around trauma-informed practices we started last year in the elementary schools, and this year is the first year we've had this team that's really looking across the district at building everyone's practice. And the trainings happen at the elementary schools, but the middle and high school are really interested in this compassion fatigue. And so Joelle's been at the middle school, and she's going to the high school, and they're all going to be working on a model of implementation next year.
Help the teachers understand the
Yes,
overwhelm thing.
yeah. It starts with awareness. If Joelle was here, she could tell you her roadmap. It starts with awareness and understanding, and then it moves to more practical strategies and what you do. And so we're building this trainer model where we're going to have people go through a course, and we're hoping that we're going to get it spread pretty quickly, because I think everyone wants it and needs it, so.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yes?
Joanne, is part of the thinking also that if you intervene early, it helps keep kids in the classroom, learning in the classroom with their peers, and preventing potential out-of-district placement, so they're no longer accessing their education within their own community.
That, and they're also not building those they don't get a chance to build the positive relationships that are so powerful at building resilience. Instead, we're sending them away or disciplining them away from the school, which is the exact opposite of what we need to be doing. So.
Thank you, Joanne. I think, I mean, and just in closing, I think Again, thank you, Joanne, for providing a background, at least for future conversation. I think it's important, school board members and community members and people that are watching. Typically, you all know that children come to us in kindergarten. And so when we talk about proactive and reactive measures, I would like to point out that I don't really feel like there's a lot that when we receive, we're in the proactive measure. You follow me? Children come to us at 5, often speaking specifically about the ACEs or those adverse experiences. They have them. And if they don't have that deposit or repository of positives, we end up walking into what I would say reactive measures to try to help them. So we're trying to come up with methodologies and the ability to make those connections with the students, with our staff. But it's important that this is a community conversation. This is a community conversation that's not just happening in our schools, but it's happening in our communities at earlier years. And we're seeing the manifestation of increases across certainly Vermont and certainly the country. So we're certainly a component of this. We're a microcosm of the issue. We would like to be in a place where we are able to absolutely have kids come in with the repository of positive, where they can be resilient to what Joanne's talking about, recognizing where they're at, but not having so much trauma where it impedes our ability to access and get them to be educated. So it's definitely a challenge, and every year we seem to have, some additional challenges. And I think for those of you who've been on the board for a while, you've been seeing that kind of continued conversation and concern. This is not just a school issue. I mean, this is our job here in the school, but this is a community and a societal issue that we're seeing that we really need to be paying attention to.
One thing I'd say, David, having heard this conversation before is I think there's increased understanding of, kids' exposure to some of the traumatic events that you're talking about, Joanne. But I also want to be careful that I'm not going to say this the right way, but sort of fall into the vagaries of trauma as sort of a broad category without an understanding that, we're putting a lot of positive training and resources into addressing something that has the potential to be very vague in terms of understanding where the resource deployment might be more impactful. So I know as this conversation evolves, one thing I'll be interested in understanding is specifics around South Burlington, and are there categories of trauma that there is a more coordinated and collaborative effort with the community to address, whether it's, I'll use a good example is homelessness. And there's a lot of effort at the city level to look at affordable housing. So whether it's, food insecurity, are there community solutions in that area that there's not just reliance on the school system to address that. So not knowing some specifics about the trauma, it's just a question I have that there's a lot of good effort being thrown at sort of again, you probably know all this kind of down to the student level, but when you hear it as a board member, it's sort of the umbrella of trauma.
Yeah, and I think our school-based clinicians, and I think I shared that data last year when we did our budget, they track, if they get referrals, and they're tracking some of that data, so they have that, and I don't know how that's being shared. They share it with us, but I don't know how it's being shared and dealt with mental health. The other thing is some of these positive things that we're doing, the PBIS and I want to call it resilience training, is not just for students who have trauma. It can impact a student who's applying to college who's completely stressed out about that. So same strategies that work for kids that go in their downstairs brain that have significant trauma work for any of us who go in our downstairs brain when someone cuts us off on the highway or whatever. Those are really good practices for all of our kids to learn. We want all of our kids to be really resilient. So I'm hoping that people understand that as well. It's not just for kids with trauma, for all of us.
Not just for kids either.
No.
Thank you,
Any
Joanne.
other questions on this? All right, on to fiscal year 2019 budget communication plan.
So we're just, again, we've kept this agenda item on. Thank you, Susie. Again, we are continuing to move through communication, as I said. Certainly tonight's another one talking specifically about the bond. I know I have a couple more communications going on up to including the pre-town meeting day, but we've had a variety of different things. I know I'm going over to one of the senior groups to also share. They're generally very interested in what's happening and some of those questions. So I know we've had some questions that have come in from community members specific to bonding or budget, and we've been working hard, and I know the board has too, around responding to those. So very much appreciated.
I have a quick question about that. One thing that we did last year, sort of late in the process, when we were on budget round 2 and 3,
Yeah.
was on the Facebook page, we were kind of pointing people to the district website
Mhm.
when new frequently asked questions were put up. We were kind of posting those answers, because I think sometimes people don't even know that some other community member has asked that question and been answered. Would you like us to sort of reinvigorate that process to start pointing people, and can we start posting some of these things on the district website so that those questions get answered directly from the horse's mouth, as opposed to community members just kind of?
Yeah, I think we last year had kind of, under budget, we had FAQs,
Right.
and I think certainly that we can
And it'd be great if you could
activate
start
that.
populating that, and if you could just shoot me an email, or Martin an
Mhm.
email, when you've got some of those up, we can
Yeah.
start on the Facebook page, just kind of pointing people in that direction.
Good idea.
Yep, and I think you've got 3 kind of responses to some of the budget and the bond,
Yeah.
which we could certainly just push those up there under the FAQs. It's fine.
So I think important part of the communication as well is how we get the word out, and I guess we'll get it out in part by being recorded, that the basis for the tax rate that we have in the information that we put out there is based on information we received from tax commissioner, is that where we get the, back in December, where they projected a 9 cents increase in property taxes based on an understanding that there was going to be a much larger increase in budgets, and actually an increase of something like 3.9% increase in cost per pupil that they were predicting. It ends up that the budgets that they've had come in so far, and it covers about 85% of the schools, that it's much lower budget. The cost per pupil is going up by 0.7%. So some pretty significant numbers in the right direction. We don't know exactly how that's going to affect us, but it very well could be that there will be little to no tax increase, or even a tax decrease after all this. Of course, there's a big caveat to that, and that is this effort right now of changing the funding system in its entirety. We don't know where that's going to land, but there is certainly significant opposition to putting it into place for this particular year, including from me, but many other people are starting to speak up that it would not be a good idea. It's not a done deal yet that it won't be put into place, but, and I'm not going to prognosticate on that. But that will kind of throw that somewhat out the window. But currently, I mean, it looks better as far as what the tax rate will be, and it should be, in fact, lower than what we have in
So
our
the
information.
yield, so specifically, the yield was set based on the parameters in which you indicated around that 3.5% increase, right?
Right,
On
right.
total budgets. Now that they're coming in lower, it's possible that the yield may go up a little bit.
Right, which would decrease.
Which would decrease the actual tax impact to us, so it would be something less than the 1.96,
Right,
right?
right.
But again, we won't know that until the legislature acts on that particular adjustment on the yield. So when we talk about the 5 concentric circles outside the tax rate, one of which is that yield, and again, we played with that yield when we looked at the budget worksheet, when we had it at a lower amount, and then it went up slightly. Obviously, if it goes up again, it could be pretty substantial to have a lesser impact on the tax rate. So That's,
Right.
but that would be typically not till May, right? Is when
Right.
that happens, if
Yeah.
it happens at all.
Yeah, that would be towards the end of the session, long after we voted on it. But my point only is that chances are very good that the tax rate that we have in our information for the budget is on the high side. And it could even be, a couple cents more. I mean, that's the possibility that I'm hearing at the State House, with the caveat that we might throw a wrench into the whole funding system.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's gonna, I think that's less likely to happen because we're seeing the budgets
Come in.
lower. And I think part of the funding was trying to deal with the fact that we were gonna have a 9-cent increase in property taxes, and that's not likely to happen, so.
Well, and the one public hearing for the change in the ed funding formula was held today, right?
Right.
By the House Ways and Means Committee,
Yep.
correct? And there's also some special ed funding changes that are in the Education Committee
Yes,
relative to block grants,
yes.
which would also have impact over a 5-year period, but I don't know when the start date of those would
That,
be.
yeah, I don't know what that is yet either.
And I think more fundamentally, I mean, this is not so much a conversation that we have scheduled to have today, but I think we should be thinking about in terms of the ongoing conversation South Burlington may want to have with Montpelier, which is the disconnect on timing, because the credibility with our community in terms of what they will see on March 6th can change with a vote that happens in May. And, we saw Act 85 last year had an impact. The good news is we had, in negotiations, we had an opportunity to cover the clawback that was retroactive to last year's approved budget. But a lot of what I was seeing coming out of the House Ways and Means would be significantly retroactive to this year's budget in a balance of property taxes and adjusted gross income tax, which, I mean, our budget in terms of what's presented to the voters, it'd be a totally different explanation, basically.
Right. Yes.
So
That's-
anyway, my point is, I do think one of the improvements that could be made on a going forward basis that maybe this board wants to make some suggestions on is really better alignment of timing issues like that.
Right. And supposedly one of the benefits of this new funding mechanism that's being kicked around is it will be more predictable and more tied to some local spending decisions. I still need to really see the modeling and see how that is supposed to work, but that is one of the benefits that is being touted for this funding mechanism. All right.
I echo when this year administratively, as we worked on our budget, we had a yield prediction that was significantly lower than where we are at. And when we were beginning that conversation, kind of from a zero-based perspective, we said to ourselves, there's no way. I mean, there were some things that we would like to identify and move on behalf of student opportunities, but there was no real opportunity given that forecast. So, and then, as you move through the process, and you find out some of the metrics that are currently impacting the budget become more favorable, but you're too far along. And that's kind of what's happened year after year after year. And so essentially, we're always in this, let's plan vigorously, let's think about what we want, but only ever able to, impact a fraction of the things that you need. And again, I think we all need to be sensitive to the taxpayers, the ability for the community to afford, but it's really, really hard to do anything that's going to have any substantial impact to students, because if it's a program in, and then there's a major reduction the following year, you're in this put it in, take it out, which is so disadvantageous to students, particularly to programming.
And that's why if this funding mechanism does in fact provide predictability and puts it more in our hands, that would be a positive thing.
Yeah,
But-
and I agree with that, but if you can't get it in time to have any level of predictability, this would be the direct opposition of it if they're trying to put something in place
Oh,
this year.
for this year, you're
Then,
right,
then we
right.
can't even tell our community today what they're gonna be essentially voting on in March.
I think that message has
Yeah.
been getting
Yeah, you got it. I know,
communicated
I'm-
certainly through the Vermont School Board Association,
Yeah.
Superintendent's Association, and individual board members as well, so.
Yep.
All right, so master planning and visioning discussion.
So again, we had this on the last meeting as well. Again, I don't need to go into any grade. I know both Bridget and Martin had the opportunity was it this past Monday?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm really thinking it's days ahead or days behind. So, just a brief update on where we are with sound insulation specific to Chamberlain. We have sent a series of letters to both the FAA and to the airport management about activating sound insulation that we believe we're eligible for today. And so we've been actively communicating with them and looking for a resolve. So there's been several iterations. I have yet to hear back from the FAA director nor the airport management at this point. And so I will be communicating and looking at another correspondence that may activate our DC delegation to request some additional support, attention to this particular issue. As far as committee work, again, the school board, you guys outlined some very specific things around master planning, specific to enrollment demographics, specific to making some sound decisions based on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to the district. We've put together that process. We're working to now populate it with the recent demographic data that's just come back. We have some financial data given from our current budget or what's being proposed to factor that in as well. We'll be looking at academic outcomes, and then I'll be making a recommendation. We hope to have about 2 more iterations in front of the board with some reporting out, as well as a couple with the committee, and then to make a recommendation slotted for around that April 30th timeframe, so that you'll be able to have an informed decision and make some recommendations, next steps, decisions around that. Again, I don't know, Bridget or Martin, if there's some things that you, in addition, wanted to report out on.
There's gonna be an excellent article next week in the other paper
Yes.
about just this issue.
So anyway, that's all I have. So again, we've been keeping it on there because we do think it's important for the community to know that we are talking about master planning and visioning, and, you know, the need to pay attention to the current situation at all 5 schools.
Great. All right, so, executive limitations, policy monitoring, 2.4, financial condition and activities.
So, this is back to you.
So we took this up last?
No, it was
No, it
actually
was a little-
2 meetings before, I
Okay.
believe.
It was November.
Yeah, well, okay. All right, John. Hey, give me a break on digits and numbers.
Monday was 2 days ago.
No.
It is,
Yeah.
3 months
I
ago.
apologize, this language from November till now, I think this is the second or third time before to seen this. I got tied up with budgets, and I just couldn't get back to it in a fashion I thought was gonna be helpful. This financial conditions and activities, there are 10 detailed policies. Some of them are easier to respond to and document than others. And there's one that I particularly have wrestled with, and I actually made a mistake in math the last time we saw this. So hopefully I've fixed the math error, and that's on page 7 of 10, policy 8. So I think the math works now. I still think we're in compliance. But in addition, policy 8 really left me uncomfortable because it had some language around the superintendent should never spend surplus, I think, and it said that the fund balance should always increase from one year to the next. And that to me was problematical because you have a state law that says every year you're supposed to spend down your surplus and use it to offset the expenditures for the 2 years following budget. So when I got done thinking about this, I decided that I would try to incorporate the language from the law in this so that we can have something to say, this is what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to retain the fund balance from 1 year and use it to offset the tax levy for the next 2 years later. And that's how I've rewritten this superintendent's interpretation, and I hope it resonates with the board. I think it is a little more clear what we're trying to accomplish when you rewrite it this way. I do also object a little bit to the term surplus. The accounting profession did away with the term surplus many years ago. We want to use undesignated fund balance instead, but I understand that's a policy change and can't be done like in this forum or venue. But I would suggest that however we do to change those, I think that should get changed. But what I have done here is pulled in the language from the law, and it describes how the fund balance from year one needs to be reserved and set aside in your balance sheet to offset the tax levy in year three, and the fund balance in year two has to offset the tax levy in year four. So every year you're going to have on your balance sheet two separate fund balances, one from 2 years ago and one from the immediate past year. And I'm just going to show how I see that working on page 2 of 10. Page 2 of 10, you see two lines at the bottom where I've given, this is a not audited statement. We should have the audit done within days. I've been promised it like this week or last week and haven't seen it yet. But I'm showing here the fund balance, the undesignated fund balance that we had at the end of 516,901 as line 8, and the at least unaudited fund balance that I showed at the end of June this past year, 576,053. And I think in terms of not spending the surplus, not spending the undesignated fund balance, you want to use as evidence the fact that line 9 is always positive. If it's negative, I think that implies some of line 8 got spent. So that's kind of like the bright line of evidence, I think, for detail policy 8. And I think we can say with confidence that we had fund balances, positive fund balances, at both the year ends, FY16 and FY17. So we met the letter of the intent of this detailed policy. The fund balance I'm reporting, 576,053, is slightly different. The auditors tell me it's going to be 555,345. So that's inevitably going to happen when these things are done before the audits are done. But I think you want to make sure that line 9 is always positive in order to meet this detailed policy. I have some exhibits in the back that back this up, but those have not changed from any of the expositions of this I've shown. And I don't think there was any issue with any of the other detailed policies. Gratifying to me is that we haven't needed much in the way of tax anticipation notes to keep our operation going. We did have a concern this past year with the delay in the budgets and the tax rates that we would run short of cash, so we did borrow a little bit of tax anticipation note money with the approval of the board. But we only expended $3,423 in interest on that. So I think I'd like to think this looks pretty good now, and I'd submit it for approval.
Can I just ask, I know you said that, I understand that we've got 555, 345 in as proposed carryover that's gonna help fund FY 2019.
Right.
I'm just confused about why these numbers don't match. So this is obviously being presented to us after the budget book was done. So the budget book looks like it has the auditor's number in it. But both the fund balance that was there to offset FY 2018 and the fund balance that's there to offset FY 2019 are different in the budget book than they are here in the policy?
Well, the easy answer on FY18 is that this number was the number that we had internally, before it was audited. And in December or so, I was able to get the audited number from the auditor that shows it as 555, 345, and I did not circle back to try to correct this at the time.
Okay.
And I'm puzzled. I suspect the same thing happened with FY18, that this number on page 2 of 10, one of them's audited and one of them's not. And I gotta believe that this one's not audited on page 2 of 10. And I'm sorry this happens, but the timing of the audits is really not conducive to easy demonstration of this.
I think bottom line, we would like to, I mean, I think what's important is what's in the budget book could be in the.
That's the audited.
In the monitoring. Unless it's so close in time that we haven't received it. But in this particular case, we think that the numbers on 2 of 10 could reflect what's actually in the budget book to be more accurate. Is that
Yeah.
a true statement?
Well,
We could change this at this point in time, yes.
well, especially the ones to offset FY18, I would think, because that would have been the 2016 audit, which we would have had, last year. So that should at least be matching, right? I understand this year we don't have the audit officially in our hands yet from 2017, but it's just confusing to me why things aren't matching, because if I were to, I would just like to see them matching. The stuff that we're saying to the public and having in our budget book should be matching what we're approving as support for our policies, I think.
Let us make the change and bring it back.
The other question I have is, John, you indicated that you always want that number to be positive. Wouldn't technically you always want that number to be 0? Because it means you didn't ask for any more money than was necessary?
Well, maybe from an ideal management perspective, yes, I'd agree with you. But in terms of a policy monitoring thing, I think all of this, in order to meet the policy monitoring criteria, I think it's sufficient to have it be positive. If it's negative, you will have spent more than you received.
Right, I mean, I understand
to
what your
0 is
point
what
is.
you're
It's
saying.
better that it be positive, but technically you want that to reflect what
If
it
we were perfect budgeters, it would always be 0.
costs to operate the
Yeah.
district. Yeah, again, materially, we're looking at about 1%, but,
I was thinking that's pretty good.
yeah.
And I'd love to be able to drill down to that more, because I would like to be able to have some level of what would be the appropriate amount that should be. Should it be based on the age of your district, the moving part, the size of your budget? I'd love to be able to know a little bit more about that, because if it's gonna be always to run 0, then it's likely that it could go well below that, so your deficit spending, if you don't have any of that margin up. I don't know what's reasonable for large companies, for, state colleges. I have no idea what that number should be. There's gotta be some financial measurement that's used there to put in there, that it probably would be wrong to have it get to 0. Functionally wrong. And so I've always struggled with what should be the amount of money that we should come to an end with. And I just feel like that's worthy of a conversation that I'm not prepared to have at the moment, but I'd love to be able to say, on a $49 million budget with the conditions that currently exist in your district, what is a reasonable amount? And obviously, if we were brand-new schools and everything had high reliability, then it could be lesser maybe. I don't know. I'd love to see if there's some sort of benchmark, something that's currently out there in either industry or other locations that are doing this. Because I'm in support of all the things that have been said. I just really struggle with what that should be.
So, I don't think, I agree that would be great to have that benchmark. But as far as monitoring, I'm not sure that we're really monitoring for you to hit a particular benchmark, not in anywhere in here, certainly not in number 8, which is much broader.
That's right, and
I mean.
and to be
that-
clear,
that's a
I'm not
good
hearing
thing.
that from you guys either, but if were boards to come in the future that said that should be 0, I don't have any sort of, policy support that allows me
Well,
to.
no, I think, yeah,
what I
benchmark
mean?
would be a good idea. It's just,
Right.
I don't think it's something that,
Right.
unless we want to start monitoring that, it's not in the monitoring
Yeah.
report.
Do we have the old data on detail policy, or the old verbiage on detail policy 8?
I don't have it with me tonight.
I don't know if it got reviewed before, but I kind of, this is your recommendation,
Right,
John, right? I
right.
guess I wanted to know what it changed
Yeah,
from.
it would have been nice to see that, I guess, in track changes mode.
So if we're gonna.
We can get that for you, too.
Yeah, if we're gonna review this again,
Attach it.
if we're gonna look at it one more time, if we could have the strikeout of the previous language, that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Any other questions or issues with this report that we want to have it addressed when it comes back? So this is actually probably an opportune time for me to raise this one issue that I didn't get this packet until today. And I do understand, it used to be that you would send them out on Fridays, and the mail was working great then, I guess, because I get it on Saturday, but I'm not getting it until Tuesday, so.
I put it in the post office in South Burlington on
Right.
Friday.
Right, no, it just, for some reason.
Yeah, I was
It was
just,
a problem for me last year, and so I think it's spreading throughout South Burlington, and that's why I have to plan on just hold mine, and I pick it up because I was finding I was getting it on
I don't know.
Tuesday morning, and then there was just not time to be prepared for being here.
yeah, I'm not getting, I mean, our, delivery of mail at home is almost every other day, and usually arriving at 7
Yeah,
at night.
I've actually heard, it's
So
a
I'm not
widespread problem, so we should just
can-
need to recognize that, and it
Well, it's on, I
actually.
mean, we have,
Get it
I'm
online.
reviewing it now online, because I'm also
Maybe this is to
experiencing the
force
same
us, yeah,
thing.
maybe
But-
this is to force us to do online.
Yep.
But I think from now on, I'm gonna have you hold it as well. Just,
I
if anybody else wants
Yeah.
that to be done, let Delina know, because it's easy for me to
Mhm.
swing by and get it on Fridays too, if I want to keep to paper, so. All right. Unless there's something else, we're going to set the agenda for the March 7th meeting.
So, I know that we had on the last one, we need to pull forward this one that we just did, so we need to make sure executive limitations 2.4 is back on here. Which,
And what are we going to do on ends monitoring?
that's gonna
We're
come back,
looking
because we
at
had that
the interpretation.
interpretation,
Right.
Did we move that, Stuart?
We did because
Because you're not here, right, so we
Oh,
can
okay.
substitute that one for the 2.4, so 13 we can put 2.4 in the place of that one. And I don't know, I know that the conversation around tobacco was there, Alex, or board members, I know that was on the agenda before, but it was taken off tonight because we
Yeah.
didn't have the information.
I can't
I don't know
tell you where I am with that. I'm still in the process of outreaching with a few people. I think it would be better to have it on the agenda for March 21st, as far as I can tell right now. So if it were, I'd like to leave it off for March 7th, if that's all right with the rest of you.
Mhm.
Right, so on the legislative discussion, is this something we want to give other South Burlington legislators an opportunity
Yeah.
to come in and report? Is
We-
this just, do you want,
So I put it on here because I think there's been a desire to have a little more legislative visibility.
right,
But I think, to your point, we should add some more time here and invite the other legislators in to get a little bit of an update on legislative activities specific to South Burlington schools. So we would send an invite out to the legislators, not just you, Martin,
right, right.
and allow for the opportunity to hear
Yeah.
some things, which was the intent. But if that's not something that's a desire
think
by the
that-
whole board, then we can take it off. We certainly have a fair amount of legislative activity that we know of.
I think it would work if we asked the legislators to report on the things affecting schools instead of what just happens to be in
Mm-hmm.
each individual legislator's committee. You know, keep it
Okay.
relevant. I mean, we may, the 4 legislators, none of them are in the Ed committee or on Ways and Means, but, you know, we can divvy up what needs to be discussed.
It's again up to the board if you think that's a good idea. We would need to add more time than the allocated time there, but.
I think we should, I mean, there's a lot of things happening there. That would be good
Yeah,
to.
it'd be nice to actually not have so many things going on, but.
That's true. Well, and actually, the one other question is, it's not clear that the other legislators will be in town, because that is the week that we have off.
If not,
So
then we would push
we
it.
probably want to push it back to the following. So let's have that one
Push,
to the next one.
March 21.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a short meeting.
Are there any,
Yeah.
are there any other policy monitoring reports that are due?
Well, they probably do, Martin, but not ready.
Well, you got 2 weeks.
There's one topic we haven't taken up in a while on how the board evaluates itself.
Update on.
Board monitoring?
Yeah.
Yeah, board
I
monitoring.
don't, when, is that on the master calendar, or?
I don't think it is.
Well, it is on the
Is it?
master
Is it?
calendar, but it's not, I don't have it with me, and we don't have it scheduled.
Well, that'd be a good time to do it next,
Might be.
I think.
Just to review what options there are, talk about it. About the-
Yeah,
the
because we
intent.
haven't been doing it. We should talk again about,
We stopped.
Mhm.
I'd still say that we just have Corey report on us every meeting. Let us know how we're doing. Only kidding.
So that would be
Yeah, let's do that.
for the next meeting, March 7th, just to talk about board monitoring.
I was just looking at the future agenda items, if there's
Yep.
anything else that we,
Actually, I mean, this may or may not be relevant, but with a new configuration of a board, do you want to do code of conduct and conflict of interest?
Yes, John?
It would make sense to do that.
yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely should do that. So, looking at the future agenda items, that will, is that taking one of them off? Do we have that on there? No, we didn't even have it on there, darn it. So well, let's, can we plan, not next time, but sometime relatively soon, to get back to an update on the teacher evaluation system pilot?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we probably can do employment contracts, but I think we would need to wait a little bit on that one because of timing. We can give you some updates on that too.
Right.
Okay.
Anything we want to add or make a plug for getting on a near-term agenda? All right, we'll go to number 16, consider the minutes of the meeting of February 13th, 2018. Were there any changes on that, comments? Looking for a head? There we go, that could be a change. Was it the, it was Tuesday?
It was Tuesday.
It was Tuesday. All right, yeah, Tuesday. There we go. Somebody's still awake.
I believe I was
Yeah, it was, oh, and, were you here? Yeah. All right, so we'll add you as being present then as well. Oh, no, you're there, right there. Okay, your name's administration, staff. So with that change, it's adopted by consensus. All right, amendment to the South Burlington Administrators Association, Section 125 plan. Who's going to
John,
talk
you
to us
wanna-
about that? John?
Yeah, this was a amendment that was made, required by the HRA, I'm thinking.
Let's see.
And I believe we already did this for the Education Association, the teachers and the support staff, but this one had not yet been done. So we'd like to get this kind of
Was I the only one that didn't?
nailed down.
I didn't get it.
It was sent electronically, and there was a note in your
Oh,
email,
I read it,
and it's
forgot
in
it.
your blue pack thing
where
for
was it?
folder.
Let's see.
You went by it, I think.
Yeah, right here. Is this something that can wait until the first?
Yeah, I think it can wait,
March?
yeah.
So that we can all, it looks a little too long for me to just read it at this hour.
It was pretty pro forma, but I was gonna look at it so I could speak to it better, but I didn't get it. And
Okay.
I'd be happy to have it go next time.
All right, oh, that's good. All right, excellent. So consent agenda. What's this John Aubin? Who's that that's
Yeah,
on
that's-
here? What? Should we
He's
take-
such a short timer, some people don't even know who he is.
Wasn't it John Stewart? What's
Yeah,
that?
they had that one
businessman
too.
did?
Yeah. So again, I'll speak to this a little bit, but John, as you know, is gonna be finishing his second year. He's been a real positive influence to our district and has helped in many ways. I think came into the district at a time last year when we really needed him. We really needed a lot. There was a lot going on in the district, not only in budgeting, but also negotiating and also other things. And so he's was very early accepted into the administrative corps and has been instrumental in helping us along the way. So we will miss him as soon as this, if you're so inclined to accept his resignation, then we'll be out immediately looking for a process and a replacement. The other ones I want to just allude to is Steve Webster. Steve Webster was a 1.0, but had reduced over the last several years. He's really been an instrumental individual in our information technology educator. And again, he made some changes from 1.0 to down to 0.8, and then slightly even lower this past year. But he has been instrumental. He is unbelievably talented individual. He came to us several years ago from Dartmouth as
This is actually his 20th year here since he came.
Yeah.
And really, since the beginning of technology in this district, from the first money that was put into computers, has really been an advocate for the technology that we have now and putting it in the hands of students.
And I would say, on behalf of Steve, he's not one to just say, we want the most expensive. He's always been very diligent around, the applications in which students need to be successful, but really, through the eye of, appropriate level of need and cost. And he is very, very, been very diligent in helping us along the way. I think about when we went from, bringing on technology and looking at whether it was going to be iPads or laptops. There was a really, really long and deep discussion around what students needed, and as a result of that, actually, you don't see a lot of desktops around anymore. And many districts went a different way, so they're still dependent upon desktops in their schools and a variety, a myriad of other things, but we'll miss him.
And I think the board saw a lot of him when we were
That's-
considering the one-to-one.
That's right,
And
that's
his
right.
information was very valuable to
Yeah.
the board at the time.
So anyway, and then Jill Kellogg has been, again, she's had a shorter stint with us, but she's also out of the high school moving on. So again, on behalf of all three, I want to thank certainly John and certainly Steve
thank
for
you,
their
John.
time.
Yep, thank you, John.
I want to thank you for extending me this privilege to work here. It's been an exciting time for me and a lot of good things going on here. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so moving on to any questions on accounts payable order number 30. No questions? Unfortunately, I can't move. Did you move to adjourn? Nicely done. That's your, All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Well, I guess I don't get to say aye. And we're adjourned. Thank you.